I haven't taught a class here in 6 years probably, so I'm rusty. I'm very rusty. I haven't preached anywhere in 6 years. Everything has been such that just didn't want to do it or feel like I wanted to. So back in, and Randall was gracious enough to give me an opportunity to teach a class, and we have a study in post-exilic history. Post-exilic, that means after the exile. And we're going to cover some ground that is already being covered. Last Wednesday evening, Justin's class was on Haggai. He'll teach a class on Zechariah, and then he'll teach a class on Malachi. Those 3 books will come up again. And if you're like me, by the time I get to it in about 3 months, you won't even know that you had anything yet. So we'll get into that and repeat some things here. But to begin with, I want to ask a question. That's not what I want. Okay, back up out of that, and I'll ask you the question from up here. The question is, can we go to heaven? Can we learn about sin and salvation, Jesus the Christ, without a knowledge of the Old Testament?
I think so.
I hear no, I hear a good question, I hear yes.
One of the problems with that question is you're going to have to know the New Testament, but the New Testament dials back into the Old Covenant. Right. So you cannot escape the Old Covenant. Right.
Good point. Good point.
Is that presuming that, we never go back and ever look at the Old Testament? We just, whoever it is.
Just don't know about it, period.
Right.
And there are allusions, references from the New back to the Old.
I think you can, because when you become a Christian, you may not know everything in the Bible initially, though, too.
Right.
So at the end of the day, if you want to continue to grow, then it would probably, natural curiosity should push you into the Old Testament. So.
Okay. Probably everyone here has multiple copies of the Bible at home, right? Multiple copies. I've got copies I don't even know that I had anymore, but we got multiple copies. And of those multiple copies, I have a number of copies that are the Old and New Testament combined. This is my father's Bible. I love my father's Bible because you can't read the words for all the writing in it. But it's combined. I also have at home 5 or 6 different versions of the New Testament. I do not have a version of the Old Testament only. And I think there's a reason for that. Because we understand our salvation, and we're all Gentiles as far as I know. Our salvation is based in the New. But let me ask this another way. Is there anything lacking in the New Testament that necessitates a knowledge of the Old Testament? And necessitates, that means it's got to be understood. Is there anything in the New Testament that necessitates a knowledge of the Old Testament? And it may be yes.
The serpent of brass held up in the pole, and that's referenced by Jesus. If you don't know the Old Covenant, you don't know what that means. Now, necessitates is a strong word.
It is a strong word. It's a word that negates what you just said.
Yes, it does.
So I guess the answer to that is also no. Give me an example of this. And this particular version happens to be the King James, what I grew up with, what I did all my memorization in, right, Lynn? Kind of hard to get away from, but I have changed the way I read it sometimes to leave out the majestic language. I take out the these and thous and so forth. But in Acts 16, you have an episode in the Apostle Paul's life. He and Silas, they're in Philippi. And in Philippi, they are approached or followed by a young woman who keeps talking about who they are and so forth. So Paul casts this spirit out of her. they are taken, beaten, taken to the inner prison, put in stocks, and they're there, and in the middle of the night, they're singing hymns, and there's an earthquake, and this jailer, who I'm going to assume is Gentile, this jailer feels the earthquake, believes the prisoners to have escaped, goes to find out about them, because you know what the responsibility is of that jailer if they had escaped. He either will be killed or he's got to take his own life. Paul says, don't harm yourself, we're here. And he comes in, falls down, and says, what shall I do to be saved? And Paul says, well, the first thing you got to do is learn the Old Testament. Is that what? No, Paul doesn't do that. They teach him what is necessary for salvation. Now we know that they gave him some words to start with. This is in 23, verse 23 and following. But they go on to teach, by implication, to go on to teach him. And in teaching him, they are baptized when? Immediately. How much Old Testament did this guy know? In fact, and asking a question I don't have an answer for, how much Old Testament did this guy learn in his Christian life? Well, maybe none. So the question becomes then, what is the value of history, especially the Bible history? What's the value of it?
It's a schoolmaster. It's the teacher to present and prepare you for what you need to know today.
Romans 15:4. It is that which is going to, it says whatever was written aforetime was written for our admonition or instruction, that is, that through endurance and through the encouragement of the Scriptures, and the word Scriptures there would refer to the Old Testament Scriptures, we might have hope. You've heard the phrase, and I don't know it exactly, but I'm going to give it a shot. If we don't learn from our mistakes, and in this case that is history, we are doomed to what? Repeat them. And the history of Israel is just one great big repetition of doing it the wrong way. And all the New Testament books, and how many books are there total in the New Testament? 66. Come on, boys and girls. 66. No, I didn't. I said, what did I say? Bible? New Testament. How many books in the New Testament? 27. There are 39 in the Old Testament. If you hold up your Bible and you separate the New Testament from the Old Testament, you got all this big stuff and this little stuff on the other side. That's kind of how it breaks down. There's a lot of Old Testament history. And there's a lot of things that we could learn from. In 1 Corinthians chapter 10, beginning verse 1, Paul says, moreover, brethren, I would not you to be ignorant how that all our fathers were under the cloud, and they all passed through the sea, and were all baptized unto Moses in the cloud and in the sea, and did all eat the same spiritual meat, and did all drink the same spiritual drink, for they drank of that spiritual rock that followed them. That rock was Christ. But with many of them God was not well pleased, for they were overthrown in the wilderness. Now these things were our examples, to the intent we should not lust after evil things as they also lusted, neither be ye idolaters as were some of them. As it is written, the people sat down to eat and drink and rose up to play. Neither let us commit fornication, as some of them committed and fell in one day 23,000. Neither let us tempt Christ, as some of them also tempted and were destroyed of serpents. Neither murmur ye, as some of them also murmured and were destroyed of the destroyer. Now these things happen unto them for examples. They're written for our admonition, upon whom the ends of the world should come. So Paul tells basically a Gentile congregation, a Gentile church, that the Old Testament is our teacher that gives us all these examples and all this instruction that we learn from and applies to us in these ways. The reason I was a little bit concerned about this thing, I had two versions of this particular PowerPoint presentation, and I thought I gave the current version to Trampus, but I didn't. So the Old Testament story, the Old Testament history ends with the juncture of Haggai, Malachi, and Zephaniah, or Zechariah that is. Those are the last three. They're the only three writers after the exile. They're the only three writers. And each one is important to other things involved in their history, their look at history. Pre-exilic history, before, is vital to answer the question, well, how did the covenant people of God get to this point? Well, we need to remember that these people got to that point twice. There's not just one period of captivity. There are two periods of captivity, right? There's the Old Testament period of captivity when they go down into Egypt, and they wind up being in captivity for 400 years. I think the New Testament gives us the number 430 years. And then there's the Babylonian captivity, which leads us to eventually the post-exilic prophets. In our study, we're going to also look at Ezra, Nehemiah, and Esther. Not in depth, but we're going to look at each of these because they are companion books to these three prophets. These are the only books of that particular period. There's 6 books total. 3 are prophetic, and 3 basically are historical. And Ezra, Nehemiah, and Esther will help to answer the question, what happened to the covenant people of God after the period of captivity. We know they're taken into captivity, but we don't really study a lot about what happened after their captivity. Let me give you I don't want to read a lot of stuff to you in this class, but let me read this to you as an introduction, overall introduction to this series. Inspired Old Testament history ended at the juncture of Haggai, Zechariah, and Malachi. The journey began with God's explanation of how Israel came to be a captive people, Genesis, and how he planned to take them to a promised land, ended with a return from a second period in a foreign land by a remnant of a covenant people. Hundreds of years separated the two captive peoples, but both were promised opportunities. Only God could give them. To the first captive people, a land of prosperity, promised to Abraham, the ancestor of promise, and to the second captive people, a blessing and Messiah, as promised to Abraham, through whom all nations would be blessed. Studies of Ezra and Nehemiah revealed two sides of the history of immigrants who left Babylon and other foreign territories to become immigrants in a land they once possessed by promise and lost by disobedience to their covenant with Jehovah. Ezra, an able scribe, came to restore the law given to Moses and the moral strength of the returnees. Nehemiah came to restore the dignity and security of the beloved Jerusalem by repairing the wall and gates. In addition, Esther represented a third side of the historical coin. She was an instrument for saving her people, whose existence was threatened by the hate-filled Haman, and she began that effort with those people who had decided not to return to Judah, but remain in Babylon. Without the inspired record bearing Esther's name, we would not have the complete history of the Israelite people after Persia came to power. Ezra, Nehemiah, and Esther are complementary books on the post-exilic history of Israel. Without them, the question, what happened after they were sent away into captivity, would not have been fully answered. The short answer, the Persians freed them. would necessarily have been followed by, then what? Into the history begun by these books were thrust 3 prophets, Haggai, Zechariah, and Malachi. Each prophet added to the history of the post-exilic period. Each had a peculiar message to deliver. Each supplemented the others to complete the history of the returnees. Haggai and Zechariah were involved in the rebuilding of the Holy Temple. Malachi lived during a later time and was instrumental in directing the people back to a proper relationship with Jehovah. The history of Judah necessarily involves a history of Persia thought and practice and the political world of the Persian Empire. This study is designed to incorporate all these various elements into a brief view of these times and prophets. So we're going to try to look at a lot of things. Some will be all Bible-based, but there'll be things that we're going to see in secular history that will take us through this particular study. So let's go ahead and assume that they are in the Promised Land. They are in the land promised by God to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. They have, under the leadership of Moses, come to the edge of this promised land. Under the leadership of Joshua, they have taken the promised land. And under the leadership of those of Ezra's generation, they are in there. So we find that this period of time in Egypt, which was really, it started out with a good purpose, right? Started out with a good purpose. Joseph, who had been taken by his brothers and sold into slavery, rose in prominence in Egypt. He became second to Pharaoh. He was in charge of all the food stores. He was a man to be reckoned with. And during the time of famine, his father, who believed Joseph to be dead, sent his brothers, 10 brothers that is, sent 10 brothers down into Egypt to buy grain so they wouldn't starve. Providentially, they wind up in an audience with Joseph, whom they don't recognize, don't know this is their brother. And they then are told they're going to have to bring the youngest brother if they expect any more support. Eventually, Joseph identifies himself to the brothers, and eventually Joseph has his father and family brought into Egypt, into a region called Goshen, northeastern quadrant of what you see on the map of Egypt. And they are shepherds, they're raising their flocks, and they're growing in numbers, and everything is good, and all that kind of good thing takes place. Then you find that after Genesis, we step into the book of Exodus. And as Dr. Clyde Woods at Freed Harbin once said, we have Genesis to tell us why we have Exodus. Because if you just picked up and started reading about Exodus, we wouldn't know anything about the history of how they got there, who these people are, where they came from. We wouldn't have the first of God's creations. We wouldn't have all the evidence that God is the supreme creator of all things. We wouldn't have that knowledge. So the people are there, and then there is a Pharaoh who began to control Egypt, who did not know Joseph. There are several different things said about this particular Pharaoh. The most that I can say about it and be sure is I don't know who it is. But there's a theory, a couple of theories. One theory is that there's a nomadic raiding group of people who come into Egypt and they take over the land, Hyksos, that they take over the land. And Joseph was serving under the Egyptian Pharaoh, and when the Hyksos came in and took control of that part of Egypt, then that's the Pharaoh who didn't know Joseph. So the people, instead of being given a place to live and a place to stay and a place to multiply, a place to grow, a place to be blessed, they are enslaved. The other theory is that Joseph began to be prominent in the reign of the Hyksos themselves. And the Egyptians mount a force from, well, the upper part of the land, the lower part on the map, mount a force to go in and push out, drive out the Hyksos. That left Joseph in a position of being in a place where he was not known. What he had done is not known. Nobody cares who your daddy is. Nobody cares what you did for the country. Nobody cares. We're just going to enslave all your people. And they do. After a period of time, roughly 400 years, God lets a man named Moses know that I want you to go down, bring my people out. I've heard their cries. It's time. So the book of Exodus is basically about Moses, his confrontations with Pharaoh of Egypt, his leading the people out, leading the people to the promised land, and then leading the people for 40 years because they would not take the land. We all know about the 12 spies who went into the land to seek the land out. They came back, and what they brought back was a story of this is indeed a land of milk and honey. There's clusters of grapes being carried on the pole between these two men. It's awesome. It's great. But we can't take it. Two guys said, we can take it. We need to get up and go take it. And so the 10 won, and God said, well, okay, if that's the way you're going to treat my promised land, then none of this generation is going to go into that land. So they wandered in a circular fashion for 40 years. Came back to the land. And as they came back to the land, then they were led by, not Moses, he can't go in, but they're led by Joshua. They go in, they take the land, they divide the land, they did everything God said except one thing. They did not drive out all the peoples. They let them hang around, let them stay. So, after Joshua dies, and after the period of time that there I am. That's where I am. After the promises were made, then the people began to do other things. So you have the book of Judges, right? And you have this cycle in Judges. You have prosperity. Everything's good. We're worshiping God. God is blessing us. And everything is good. Oh, it's just great. And then they begin to sin. Turn away from God. And after a period of time, God says, there's enough of this. So God sends in someone to, what's the word I'm looking for here? Manage the problem. That's not the word I'm looking for. It's a good one though, Matt. God sends people in to manage the problem. And they macro-manage that. Boy, they manage that problem so well that the people begin to cry out and have fits and have memories of what we used to have and so forth. So then they cry to God to relieve us of this oppression. So God, in His goodness, sends a judge, a leader of some kind. There's about, 13 of them? 13 judges over a period of about 400 years or so. And they come in, they clean slate, and they get the rebelling, the oppressing people pushed out, and the people are prospering, and they're praising God, and they're worshiping God, and so forth. And then they start sinning again. And this takes place for about that 400 years. Then the people decided, well, what we really need is we need a judge. We need somebody to be over us, like the other nations. So the books of Samuel, the book of Kings and Chronicles are all about the kings. And in this, let us be like the other peoples. It is a rejection of Samuel as the last judge. No. It is a rejection of God. So God says, this is the way it's going to be. When you have a king, this is going to happen, that's going to happen, this is going to happen, that's going to happen. Oh, we got to have a king, got to have a king. But God says, fine. I want you to go over here, I want you to anoint this man. Saul is his name. He's what, Benjamite? Saul's a Benjamite. And Saul, man, he looks like a king. You know what I'm saying? He looks like a king. He's head and shoulders above everybody. He's tall. He's dark. He's handsome. He doesn't wear glasses. He's just a man's man. So he becomes king. And we know what happened to him after a period of time in which he's trying to be a good king, and he leads in war at least once. Then he oversteps his responsibility, oversteps his authority, oversteps what he should be doing. He tries to take on the role of a king and a priest. So he's rejected by God. God picks out somebody else. Goes to the house of Jesse. And has all these fine-looking young men walking by him. And Samuel, we're impressed with the looks of other people. I mean, we are. That's a fine-looking person. This afternoon, just to give you a sidebar here, the doctor came in to talk with Wanda, and I was sitting there. They're talking, and this guy's sitting there. I mean, I've seen muscles in the gym and everything. But this guy was muscled up and had forearms the size of hams and stuff like that. And he left the room, and Wanda said he looked more like a bouncer than he did a doctor. And he could bounce me all over the place and just fine. So this is a strapping young man. This has to be the king. And 6 times the answer is no, this is not who I'm looking for. Don't you have any other people left? Don't you have any other more sons? Well, I got this kid over here taking care of the sheep. Well, go get him. And David is anointed. David is a good king. Not a perfect king, he's a good king. He sins against God in such a way that he will not be able to build God a house. He wanted to build God a house, and God said, no, I don't want you to build me a house. You're a man of war, and it's not yours to be done. But he has a son, and his name is Solomon. Solomon begins the road as a good king, a wise king. He asks for wisdom, and of all the things that anyone could ask for, it's amazing that the idea of wisdom is what I want. And he's given wisdom. People come from all over the place just to check out how wise this man is. Here's a woman who wants this child, and because she laid on her child and killed. So there's these 2 women fighting over this child. So Solomon says, "Hey, no problem. Take a knife, cut them in 2 to give half to each of them." Now there's a solution. Let's mention the problem. And so the mother says, "No, don't do that." So that's all cleared up. Here comes Sheba, who wants to check out this wise man. But he gets himself into a world of hurt. He wants to be a great king in the eyes of all the nations around him. So he begins to marry what would be called political marriages. He marries the daughters and princesses of other countries and other peoples, and they come in and he builds them all houses, and they worship other gods. So he winds up building them places for them to worship, and then he gets off on the track, and then it's just a sad ending until maybe a sad old man, at least in my thinking, writes the book of Ecclesiastes. He said, "Man, I wish I'd learned this a long time ago, that this is what I should have done." But he has a son. His name is Rehoboam. Rehoboam is the king now. And Rehoboam asked his buddies, asked his peers, how should I handle these people? What should I do? How should I handle them? And they said, oh man, you need to tell these people that you thought your daddy was hard. I'm going to be even harder on you, and I'm going to just make you pay through the nose, and I'm going to give you difficult times. He said, yeah, I like that. The other counselors had told him, you be a friend to the people, and they'll be a friend to you. So he went with his peers, and he began to come down hard on them. So there's a split in the thinking of the people. These 12 tribes under one king for a very short period of time, relatively, are divided into a northern kingdom of 10 tribes called Israel, and the southern kingdom of Judah and Benjamin called Judah. And Jeroboam is the king, first king of the northern kingdom, and you do know that God is all right. He's okay with this arrangement of north and south until Jeroboam decides in his thinking, well, these people who are faithful Jewish people are going to go down to Jerusalem, these men, 3 times a year as required by the law, and I'm going to lose these people, and then I'll also lose my kingship, my kingdom. So he has a plan, manage the problem. He builds 2 idols. I wonder why calves are always idols that the Israelites always preferred. Anyway, he builds 2 idols. Puts one in Dan, one in Bethel in the north and south, and tells the people, they're your gods, you go worship them, you don't have to go back to Jerusalem. So begins the legacy of the kingdom of the divided kings. In the north, these 10 tribes called Israel, I was going to try to find out and remember how many kings were there in the northern kingdom during the lifetime of the kingdom? 19? Thank you, Matt. I knew Matt was going to know this. You have a question? Ask Matt. 19. How many of those kings were men who followed God? I'm thinking 0. What Rehoboam began, or what Jeroboam began, other kings simply followed. The sins of Jeroboam and the idolatry that he led the people. There was not a single king who my mom would say is not worth spit. Not a one of them. Southern kingdom, how many kings were there in the southern kingdom?
19 and 1 queen.
19 and 1 queen. That was an interesting story right there. How many of them were God-following kings? 4, 5, 4.
Maybe.
We can name that bell is for those who need to take the Lord's Supper. It'll be in this classroom at the back if you need to take the Lord's Supper. We know like Josiah, the 8-year-old who became king. Good king. And then there were, who else was there? Good king. Hezekiah. Yeah. And I love the story of Hezekiah with the extension of his life and so forth. And there were a couple others, but not everyone, but there were some who followed after God. So that with these kingdoms in which God was always taking second place, in which God was being overlooked, in which God was not being obeyed. First, the northern kingdom, Israel, was conquered, deconstructed by the Assyrians. And Samaria was destroyed in what, 722? 722? Is that right? Okay, 722 BC. So that's what happened there, and the peoples were deported. They were taken into captivity. They were spread around the nations of the Assyrian Empire, and other peoples were brought in because, you know, keep nationalism down. We're going to replace your people with other people so that nobody's going to, you know, raise a hand against us. And the beginning of the Samaritans came from that particular program. And at that point, 722 BC, there is no northern kingdom. There are no 10 northern tribes. There are only Judah left. And with Judah being left, we would think they would say, you know, we've kind of observed what's happening with our brothers and sisters up here in the north. It doesn't really seem to be working out to ignore God and not be faithful to God. It doesn't seem to be working out. It didn't work out for them, so maybe we need to do a better job. They didn't do it that way. Didn't do it that way. Instead, their kings, I think after Josiah, there's not really a great king, a great God-fearing king after Josiah. But they began to go further and further into disrepair. So Jerusalem is not long after Israel in falling. Israel's destruction came in 3 stages. In 605 BC, 597 BC, and 586 BC. 3 different times. Forces from the Babylonian Empire came in and took riches from the temple, from the people, and took people out with them, and took them into Babylon, into captivity. The problem, though, was not just with this taking place. The problem goes back to the reign of good King Hezekiah. Back in 2 Kings 20. In verse 12, there are ambassadors, there are visitors. 2 Kings 20, verse 12. At that time, there's this king of Babylon. I love his name. Berodach Baladan. Reminds me of Paladin. In the old Western stuff with Richard Boone. But Berodach Baladan sends a number of men to Jerusalem, to visit King Hezekiah and to let him know that, well, we're going to let you keep your kingdom and we're going to let you do this, do that. And, Hezekiah is feeling good about that. He makes a very major mistake. He shows these people the wealth. The wealth. We're going to look at later, we're going to look at David's temple, so we can compare that to Solomon's temple, compare that to Zerubbabel's temple later. But he saw all this wealth. And you know who he told about all this wealth? That's right. He told his daddy. He told the king of Babylon, Merodach Baladan, about what these people have down there. So these first 2 sieges and stages, 605, 597, are not under Merodach Baladan, but under Nebuchadnezzar's authority. But they come in, just take all kinds of values out of the temple and the houses and David's house and so forth, and then they take people out. in 3 stages. And then you have, toward the end of everything, 3 kings: Jehoiakim. Then you have following Jehoiachin, and I think it's Jehoiachin is also called Jeconiah, I think. And then you have Zedekiah, the last king. And these kings are just vassals. They're put into place by the pleasure of the king, Nebuchadnezzar, and they really think they're somebody, but they're really not. They really wind up having to do whatever the king wants them to do. Jehoiakim, 2 Kings 23, 34 through 24, verse 5, was perhaps the longer of these men. Then you have Jehoiachin. His dynasty lasts 24, 6 through 16, then 25, 27 through 30. Then Zedekiah is the last one, 2 Kings 24, 17, 25, 7. The people are deported. The last of the treasures are taken. Just the rabble and scraps of people are left in the place, and Jerusalem has fallen. Was God pleased with that fall? I'm not sure if pleased is the right word. God told them, this is what's going to happen. And God told them, this is what's going to happen. And God told them, this is what is going to happen. And you know what? It happened. Exactly as they've been told. So all tonight was just basically to get us to the point that they're in captivity and so forth. I didn't really give you any opportunity to say a lot, but if you'd like to offer something now would be a good time, because I'm through with what I wanted to do tonight. Okay, we've got a couple of minutes. I hope you enjoy your time, and I'm going to go get something to the house and go back to the hospital and see if I can keep my wife home. I will. She, as I say, she's a keeper.